Welcome back. In this second segment, we'll actually I'll walk you through writing a script. This first script will be pretty simple, and what we'll do is cover a lot of the material that we covered in the second lecture on descriptive statistics. So again, a script is just several lines of code that we'll compose in the R editor. We'll comment that script, we'll save it, and then we can use it later. The goals for today's script specifically are to read data into a data frame, explore the contents of that data frame, and we'll plot histograms and get descriptive statistics, just like we did in lecture 2. So we're going to use the wine tasting example of wine ratings. So remember, in the last lecture, you looked at different types of histograms to get the feel of different shapes of distributions, and we ran descriptive statistics like the mean, the standard deviation, skew, and kurtosis. So what we'll do today is we'll actually write a script in R together that runs those analyses. These data are available on the course website in a file called stats1.ex.o1.text. So this is the first example in Statistics 1, and I saved the data in a text file, so should have no problem reading it. So what I like to do at the beginning of any script is just start with some comments. Remember, the pound sign says everything that follows is just a comment, so R is going to ignore it. This is just for our purposes. So at the beginning of the script, I just wrote Statistics 1, Lecture 3, Example Script. This is a good thing for you to do at the beginning of your script for your homework assignment. So for example, you could have pound sign, Coursera, Statistics 1, Homework 1, maybe the date at the top. What are we doing in this script? What are the goals? That's my next line. Well, we're going to read data, we're going to plot histograms, and we're going to get descriptive statistics. So that's my other just general comment at the top. I do this for all of my scripts because I teach several different statistics classes. I teach some undergraduate classes. I teach graduate level classes. For all of those classes, I'm writing scripts. I run a lab here at Princeton where I'm engaged in lots of research projects. So some of them are my active research projects. I need something at the top to just remind me, what is this script about? What was it for? What did I do in this script? So at the top, just put in some comments to remind you for later, what does this script do and why did you create it in the first place? The first thing we're going to do in a script, and this is true of every script you'll write this semester, is you'll read the data into what's called a data frame. And the idea of a data frame, if you're coming from other types of software like Microsoft Excel or SPSS or SAS, you're used to seeing a data frame that is a matrix of rows and columns, where typically you have one person's data per row. That's a data frame. So we're going to read this into a data frame. And the way that's done in R is you just create a new object in R. So an object is like a variable, and we'll get into the distinctions between objects and variables as we talk more about R. But I'm just creating an object that I call ratings. And that stands for the wine ratings. I could have called that anything. Okay? I could have called it wine ratings. I could have called it WR for wine ratings. I called it ratings. This what looks like a less than sign and a dash, that's actually the equivalent of saying equal to. What we're saying is, let's set ratings equal to stats1.ex.o1.text. The function in R that allows us to do that is called readTable. So read.table is an R function. I'm going to read table, my file name, and then I'm going to have one argument after that called header equals true. What that means is my file stats1.ex.o1.text, it has a header in it, meaning the first row of that file contains my variable names. It doesn't contain the actual data. It contains the variable names. So it doesn't look like any of the other rows in the file. It's a header. It contains information about the file. So I have to tell R that the header is there. Otherwise, in other words, header equals true. The next thing we can do is explore the contents of that data frame. So now I have in R an object called ratings. There's a function in R called class. If I just say class open parentheses rating close parentheses, then R will tell me this is a data frame. R figured out that it was a data frame because it had a certain structure to it. It had a certain number of rows, certain number of columns, and it had a header. And we used the read table command to create that object, so R figured out it's a data frame. If I use the names function, then R will return the names of the variables that were in that file that we used in read table. And remember, the 4 different wines that we're looking at are Red Truck, Whoop Whoop, Hobnob, and Foreplay. Those were the names of the columns in my file. The next thing we want to do is plot histograms for each of the wine ratings. So each one of those columns had 30 ratings. Remember, there were 30 wine raters. They each rated the 4 different wines. So this data frame is a 30 by 4 data matrix. It's actually a little bit larger than that because there's a column for the wine raters and there's that top row for the variable names. So it's actually 31 by 5, but the data are in a 30 by 4 matrix. The function in R to get a histogram is just hist. So if I type hist open parentheses red truck, it will plot a histogram for the red truck, the ratings for that wine red truck. We have 4 different wines and we want to look at all of them, and I showed you that in lecture 2. I showed you all 4 histograms on one sheet so that we could compare, or sort of one display, so we could compare the different shapes. So the way to do that is to use what's called the layout function. And by doing layout matrix combine 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2 by row equals true, that's a lot of fancy code just to set up my page so that I can present 4 histograms on one page. So let's unpack that line of code. First is this function C. That stands for combine, or more technically, concatenate. We're going to concatenate just 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to arrange them in a 2 by 2 matrix. That's what this next function does. It creates a matrix, and it's a 2 by 2 matrix, and we're going to list things by row, which is why we have by row equals true. And that's all put into another function called layout. So what you can see here, if you have some programming experience, that functions can be embedded in functions. Once I set that layout, then I just plot my 4 histograms. So histograms, ratings, $, whoop whoop. What that says is go to the ratings data frame and $, picks out one of the columns in the ratings data frame. I want to pick out the whoop whoop column. And I got a little fancy here. I labeled the x-axis. If you do help open parentheses hist close parentheses, it will show you all the options available to you after just plotting the ratings. So you could add in a label for the x-axis, you could add in a label for the y-axis, you could add in a label for the overall graph. That's done by main-lab equals. You can use the help function to see what other options are available. The $, again, just says pick out one of my variables in the ratings data frame. So histogram, ratings, whoop whoop, red truck, hobnob, foreplay. We'll put all 4 of those on one page. Finally, what we want to do is get descriptive statistics for all these. So that's real easy. There's a function called describe. And if I do describe ratings, that will return descriptive statistics for the 4 variables in my data frame ratings. So the main functions we're going to use in this script are read table, class, names, hist, and describe. Again, I mentioned this briefly, but to learn more about these functions, all you have to do in the R console is type help, open parentheses, and the function name, and R will show you all the options that are available within that function. You can also just Google how to do something in R, and you'll get lots of help that way. As well, we'll put on the course webpage some of the better help sites that we found, because I think you'll see if you Google too much, you'll find a lot of garbage out there. So we'll point you to some of our favorite help sites, and we'll provide some of our own help documents. But that's a quick way within R. R has these built-in help functions. So the final products you should have from this script that you should do as you walk through this video is you should finish with a script that produces histograms and descriptive statistics. And they should look like the products that I showed you in, or the slides that I showed you in lecture 2. So we might want to zoom in on this because the font's a little small. But this is an example script that does everything that I just walked you through. And at the top, it just has a comment that says, this is Statistics 1, Lecture 3, and this is an example script. What does this script do? It reads data, it plots histograms, and it gets descriptive statistics. The first function it calls is library psych. That just makes sure the psych library is loaded. We need the psych library loaded because some of these functions are only in the psych library. The next thing we do is we read the data into a data frame called ratings. That's this line of code here. Ratings is read table stats1.example1.txt header equals true. If we want to know what type of object are these ratings, then we look at class ratings. We list the variable names, names ratings. And we want to print all 4 histograms on one page. We use the layout function. Then we plot all histograms using the histograms function. Finally, to get the descriptives, we use the describe function. You should be able to create that script on your own and run it with the example data set that we provided. And you should be able to produce 4 histograms that look just like this. So the uniform histogram for whoop whoop, the nice normal one for red truck, the positively skewed for hobnob, the negatively skewed for foreplay. It should also produce descriptive statistics that look like this. Again, these are from lecture 2. We just have the mean, the standard deviation, the median, trimmed mean, and so on. Here's the skew, here's the kurtosis. All the descriptive statistics for these 4 wines for the 30 wine experts who rated these wines. Make sure before we proceed that you can write a script that does just that much. And if you can, then you'll be prepared to do the first homework assignment, which will ask you to do exactly that. With a new data set, it'll ask you to produce histograms and produce descriptive statistics.